Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Lead Center's webinar, Race, Ethnicity, and Disability, the Financial Impact of Systemic Inequality and Intersectionality. We are so glad to have you with us today. During today's webinar, you will learn about the financial impact of systemic inequality and intersectionality and how practitioners in the workforce development field are operationalizing the lessons learned about race, disability, and poverty. Today's webinar is hosted by the LEAD Center, which stands for Leadership for the Employment and Economic Advancement of People with Disabilities. For those of you who may be new to the LEAD Center, we are a Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, policy development center. The LEAD Center is led by Social Policy Research Associates and National Disability Institute, and is funded by the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the U.S. Department of Labor. The mission of the LEAD Center is to promote innovation in policy, employment, and economic advancement to support individual and systems level change for all people with disabilities. Next slide, please. So that everyone can fully participate in today's webinar, we'd like to take a moment to share some captioning and housekeeping tips. Today's webinar is live captioned. If you would like to hide captions, click the live transcript button to find the hide captions option. You can also adjust the caption size under the subtitle settings option. You also have the option to open the captioning webpage in a new browser. The link has been posted in the chat box. You can adjust the background color, text color, and font using the drop-down menus at the top of the browser. Position the windows to sit on top of the embedded captioning. Next slide. If you have content questions for our presenters, and we do encourage you to ask them, please type them into the Q&A panel, and we will save time at the end for questions and answers. If your question is not content related, for example, you need tech support, use the chat box instead. Next slide, please. To kick off our day today, we would like to welcome the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the U.S. Department of Labor, Jennifer Sheehy. Prior to her current position, Jennifer spent 10 years at the U.S. Department of Education in many roles, including acting director of the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research, acting deputy commissioner of the Rehabilitation Services Administration, and special assistant to the Assistant Secretary of the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. Jennifer came to the Department of Education from the Presidential Task Force on Employment of Adults with Disabilities, where she was Senior Policy Advisor and served a detail as Associate Director in the White House Domestic Policy Council. Before she joined the task force staff, Jennifer was Vice President of the National Organization on Disability and Director of its CEO Council. In 2016, Jennifer was also appointed by the President to the Ability One Commission. Jennifer, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Mahika, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm particularly excited about the topic of this webinar because it touches on all of the priorities of the Office of Disability Employment Policy, and I'll get to that in a moment. But first, let me describe myself for those of you that need a visual description. I'm a white woman in her 50s, blonde hair, way too long right now, and I use a wheelchair. So the Office of Disability Employment Policy is 20 years old this year. We're excited to celebrate that landmark anniversary, but we have a lot of work to do. So while celebrating, we are also trying to provide resources and continue to do good policy development work to benefit Americans with disabilities. So the priorities that our Assistant Secretary, Taryn Williams, and our Secretary, Marty Walsh, have established are four. The first is inclusive COVID response and recovery. What does that mean? That really means as we build back better, we want to build workplaces and workforces that reflect the complexity and the profile of our nation and are as inclusive as possible from the start. That means accessible technology, workplace flexibilities, accommodations, and general engagement and inclusion. The second is equitable policy, equity in disability policy, and considering disability in the national discussions on equity. And again, that's why this webinar is so important today. One of the things that we know is that if we develop inequitable policies, then we will never be able to allow people with disabilities from all backgrounds to succeed in the way that we intend. And the first step in developing equitable policy is data. And that's why I'm so excited to hear about NDI's data today and how we can capture the barriers, the need, and then envision a future where workers of all disabilities, all races, ethnicities, and from underserved areas can benefit. The third is youth, making sure that young people with disabilities are transitioning into meaningful, lucrative, financially stable, and empowered careers. That's going to be very important right now because young people, all young people, are disproportionately affected by this COVID interruption. So, of course, that's one of our priorities. And finally, competitive integrated employment. We don't really do anything but competitive integrated employment, but we want to help states and service providers and individuals transition from settings where they may have been paid sub-minimum wage into competitive wages and inclusive integrated settings. So those are our 4 priorities as we celebrate 20 years. And it's September, at the end of September. So we're also looking forward to National Disability Employment Awareness Month in October. Please visit our website at dol.gov/ODEP for ideas on how communities, schools, businesses, nonprofit organizations, and you can celebrate National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So I want to close by thanking SPRA and NDI and the team at ODEP that is working on these important issues. And I especially want to thank our presenters today. I'm excited to hear from you and learn more. Thanks. And now back to you, Mahika.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next slide, please. My name is Mahika Rangnicker, and I am delighted to serve as a moderator for today's webinar. Our presenters today include subject matter experts and seasoned workforce professionals from the field who will share with you how they are operationalizing lessons learned about race, disability, and poverty. Dr. Andrea Urqueta Alfaro is the Director of Research at the National Disability Institute. Andrea has more than 9 years of experience as a behavioral research scientist with a focus on disability and lifespan development. Her research is informed by 6 years of experience providing counseling to families of children with visual impairment and multiple disabilities, and by 10 years of teaching experience at universities in the United States, Canada, and Chile on topics including visual disability and rehabilitation and developmental psychopathology. Andrea earned a master's in special education from the San Francisco State University and a PhD from the University of California at Berkeley in developmental psychology. She subsequently completed 4 years of postdoctoral work examining the impact of sensory and cognitive impairment on lifespan development at Envision Research Institute in the United States and the University of Montreal in Canada. Nathan Turner, a part of the Achieving a Better Life Experience or ABLE National Resource Center Black, Indigenous, or Other People of Color Ambassador program, is an ABLE financial coach and ABLE account owner. He serves on a wide variety of stakeholder groups, including on the Board of Trustees for Legal Aid of Western Ohio, the Ohio Statewide Independent Living Council and Advocacy Task Force, the Ohio Self-Determination Association, Lucas County Board of Developmental Disabilities Board of Directors, Ability Center of Greater Toledo. All of these organizations provide substantial support to minorities and BIPOC communities. Nathan has a vast amount of personal experience navigating all types of public benefits, including Medicaid, Medicare, home and community-based waivers, Social Security work incentives. Nathan was educated in political science and international studies from Wright State University and has received awards from several organizations, including Lucas County Board of Developmental Disabilities, Courageous Community Services and Partners for Inclusion. Ben Feimer is a credit building manager at Justine Petersen. He graduated from Missouri State University with a degree in anthropology, which he feels really set him up for working with people, even if that job had nothing to do with anthropology. After spending time in securities, healthcare, and retirement planning, Ben left the world of finance to join the Peace Corps as a volunteer English teacher in a remote village in Western Mongolia. Ben came to Justine Petersen in late 2017. He was attracted to the position and organization because it combined his knowledge of the financial world with the opportunity to do community-based work in the city he grew up in. Next slide, please. People of color with disabilities face unique systemic challenges as a result of their intersecting identities. Centuries of exclusive practices in the United States, such as redlining and employment discrimination, have resulted in a society where people of color with disabilities, particularly Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities, are at a particular disadvantage financially. After today's session, you will know the context for understanding intersectionality as it applies to race and disability, how people of color with disabilities face unique systemic challenges as a result of their intersecting identities, and ways to positively impact financial inclusion and build economic self-sufficiency through tools like credit building, financial education, and ABLE accounts. I will now turn it over to Andrea, who will talk about some of NDI's research at the intersection of race, ethnicity, and disability. Next slide, please. And it's all yours, Andrea.
Thank you, Mahika. And thank you everyone for this opportunity to talk to you about the research that is being conducted at the National Disability Institute, or NDI for short. In this presentation, I will review key findings from a report that looked at the financial characteristics of persons who have disabilities and are also persons of color. In this slide, you can see there is a link that if you click on it, once you receive the slides, you can get a copy of this report. The report is entitled Race, Ethnicity, and Disability, the Financial Impact of Systemic Inequality and Intersectionality. First, let me say something very briefly about intersectionality, although Mahika already touched on that. So intersectionality refers to the fact that persons who belong to multiple historically marginalized groups, for example, persons who have disabilities and are also persons of color, face several sources of financial barriers and discrimination, which has a compounding effect and which leads to higher levels of inequality. Now, from a research perspective, this means that we cannot understand the inequality that results from intersectionality from looking at data from people that do not live in that intersectionality. So it's not enough to have data on people of different races and ethnicities and separately data on people that have disability. What we need is data from people that actually have disabilities and are also people of color. And that's precisely what this report that I'm going to share with you today did. So next slide, please. Okay, so before I go into a highlight of data points from the report, which was released in 2020, I want to give you a little bit of context. So, and I had to correct myself, not in 2017, as in the slide said, but in 2015, NDI report, NDI released a different report that concluded that the most financially vulnerable populations in America are the group of individuals that live at the intersection of disability, race, and ethnicity. Now, fast forward to 2020, and we were last year, so if we can remember last year, we were facing two concurrent crises. So first, the COVID-19 pandemic, which we're still enduring, and which was and is disproportionately impacting people of color. And then we also were facing widespread recognition of historic and systemic racism that disproportionately impact communities of color. So given these two concurrent crises that we were experiencing, we at NDI felt that it was needed and urgent to update and also expand our research on the intersectionality of disability and race. And I want to acknowledge here, before I go into the data points, that this research was conducted by my colleague and the prior director of research in DI, Dr. Nanette Goodman. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's start by looking at educational attainment. And I'll do that because we know that educational attainment is such an important factor for achieving employment. So let's look at educational attainment by disability status and race and ethnicity. The graph bars that you see in the graph here represent percentage of working age adults that have a bachelor's degree. Now, within age, race, and ethnicity represented in the graph, and we have non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic Black, Latinx, and Indigenous, you will see that there is a red bar, which represents the population with disability, and a blue bar, which represents people without disabilities. So let's first look at these two bars within each race and ethnicity. And what you can see is that no matter which race we look at, working age adults with disabilities have a lower percentage of them have a lower percentage of having a bachelor's degree compared to people of the same race but without disabilities. So for example, if we look within white, we can see that 41% of people who are white without disabilities have a bachelor's degree. Compare that to only 17% of white people with disabilities. Now let's look at Indigenous. You see that 16% of people who are Indigenous with disabilities have a bachelor's degree. Now, that is low to begin with, right? But in Indigenous people with disabilities, this is even lower. Only 9% of them have a bachelor's degree. So this is showing the impact of having a disability regardless of your race or ethnicity. So now let's look at the intersectionality. And to do that, we're only going to focus on the red bar. So we're only going to look at data for people with disabilities. And you can see in the graph that compared to white people with disabilities, all other races, Black, Latinx, and Indigenous, have a lower percentage of the population that have a bachelor's degree. 17% of white persons with disability have a bachelor's degree, compared to only 11% of Black, 10% of Latinx, and 9% of Indigenous. Next slide, please. Now let's look at poverty rate in working age population. First, I want to call attention to what poverty means in this data. So imagine being a person who is living with an annual income that is below $12,760. Now imagine being a family of 4 that is living with a budget of less than $26,200 a year. So this is what poverty means, if we can imagine that. I also want to notice that disability cash benefits are included in the calculations of poverty here. This means that the poverty rates that I'll be reviewing in people with disabilities are after we include whatever cash benefit they get due to their disability. So now let's look at the data in the graph. We see that within each race ethnicity, a higher percentage of persons with disabilities live in poverty compared to people without disabilities. For example, let's look at within the Black population. We see that 17% of Black persons without disability live in poverty. But over twice that, 36% of Black persons with disability live in poverty. Now let's look at the impact of intersectionality. So again, let's only look at the red bars representing people with disabilities only. And we can see that compared to white, all other people with disability have higher rates of living in poverty. So 23% of white people with disabilities live in poverty. Compare that to 36% of Black people with disabilities, 34% of Indigenous people with disability, and 28% of Latinx people with disabilities. And it's important to consider here that disability is both a cause and a consequence of poverty. And this is so because most people with disabilities are left out of the labor market, while at the same time, they have extra expenses that they have to incur because they are living with disabilities. And if you're living in poverty, you're experiencing factors that can lead to disability. For example, you might have a chronic condition, and if you don't have access to affordable, timely, and quality healthcare, that chronic condition can become a permanent disability. Next slide, please. Okay, now let's look at the cost of housing. So if a household is spending more than 50% of their income in housing, that household is considered severely cost burden. And you can imagine if you're spending more than 50% of your income in a household, you're in a position of extreme financial fragility. You're going to be way less able to withstand changes in your income. For example, if you lose your employment, like it has happened to many people during the pandemic, or if you have new unexpected costs, like for example, you have a family member that gets sick and there are extra health expenses. So let's look at what do we see in terms of the impact of disability. Again, like in the other cases, we see that in people with disability, there is a higher percentage of households that are severely cost burdened. So let's look at Black and Latinx. And you can see that in both, 23% of Black and Latinx households without disability are severely cost burdened, and about 10% more of households without disability that are Black and Latinx are severely cost burdened. So you can see that 10% more likelihood of being severely cost burdened if you have a disability and you're within Black and Latinx. Now let's look at intersectionality. Once again, what we can see is that Black and Latinx have a worse outcomes compared to white without disabilities. So 23% of white households without a disability are severely cost burdened, but about 10% more of Black households with disability and Latinx households with disability, 33% and 34% respectively, are severely cost burdened. And this could in part explain why the pandemic has disproportionately impacted Black and Latinx households with disabilities. Next slide, please. Lastly, I want us to look at net worth. So by net worth, we're talking here about the assets of a household, okay? So this would be, for example, the value of the house, etc. I want to know that the monetary values that I will review only represent the net worth of households where the householder is of working age. So these values are leaving out individuals that acquire disability after retirement and who were able to accumulate wealth in the workforce without having a disability, okay? And also I want to highlight that the graph is showing the average household net worth. So this means that there are people below those averages as well in each of these groups, okay? These are the averages, okay? So the data shows that within each race and ethnicity, households with disability have a lower net worth compared to households without disabilities. The biggest gap that you can see here is within whites. So if you look at white households without a disability, then average net worth is $132,400. Compare that to only $27,100 in net worth in white households without a disability. Now, the gap within the other races is smaller, as you can see in the graph, and this has to do with the detrimental advantage that in this society, being white and having no disabilities afford, right? But even in Black and Latinx, you see the disparity between households with and without disabilities. So let's look at Latinx households without a disability. The average net worth is $19,800. In Latinx with disabilities, the average is below $13,300 and $400. Now let's look at intersectionality. And so we see that Black and Latinx households with disability have lower net worth, average net worth, than white households with a disability. And this is particularly striking when we look at Black households with a disability. You can see that the net worth is only $1,282. And so in closing, I just want to highlight how time and time again, when we look at financial outcomes, we can see that the ones that have the most financial vulnerability are those living at the intersection of disability and race. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and we go back to Mahika.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for laying that groundwork for our conversation today. You know, as Jennifer mentioned in her opening, quality data collection and analysis is so critical to developing inclusive policy. So it was great to kind of get this overview. And Andrea, like you said, we are in a unique position in time to reflect on the intersectionality of race, of injustice, poverty, and disability. And we do have a responsibility to not only increase our awareness of how people of color with disabilities in the US are even more impacted by systemic inequalities, but also to take advantage of opportunities to positively impact their financial inclusion and stability. And so one of these examples, are ABLE accounts. And I'm going to bring in Nathan Turner, who will tell us more about his experiences as an ABLE account owner. Next slide, please. And just as a reminder, if you have any questions for our speakers today, please do put them in the chat, in the Q&A box so that we can get to them at the end of the presentation. So ABLE accounts are a savings vehicle that allows an eligible individual with a disability to save for qualified disability expenses while maintaining eligibility for critically needed public benefits. And so Nathan will talk a bit more about ABLE as well as some of his other work in financial security. So welcome, Nathan. It's really good to have you here.
Yes, thank you so much, Maika, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm working on two key initiatives around empowerment with BIPOC disability communities. Recently, I began working with the National Disability Institute's ABLE National Resource Center as part of a truly incredible team of ABLE account owners and family members who are serving as BIPOC ambassadors to help the center in providing outreach and awareness of the benefits of ABLE accounts to BIPOC communities. And for the past several years, I've also worked locally with the Lucas County Board of Developmental Disabilities on a grant from the Ohio Developmental Disabilities Council. It's called Money Matters, and I co-facilitate a series of hybrid courses on basic financial literacy, work readiness, and competitive employment, and also utilizing ABLE accounts and other strategies to stay eligible for public benefits. And I think what's critical about these initiatives is that they demonstrate the value of peer support as strategies for best practices in delivering equitable information on financial empowerment. Achieving equity for people with disabilities and people with disabilities who are members of Black, Latino, and other communities of color require a truly individualized and person-centered approach. We need to meet everyone where they are and help them to recognize that they do not need to have all of the answers immediately. What I like to call not having a PhD in ABLE to benefit from opening the ABLE account and generally increasing financial education.
Great. Thank you, Nathan, for that wonderful introduction. Can you tell us a little bit more about what ABLE means to you personally, and maybe how having an ABLE account, how has that changed the way that you think about building wealth?
So in my role as an ABLE ambassador, and also when I co-facilitate my Money Matters classes to the DD community locally, I have a special saying. I reiterate the fact that money means freedom to people with disabilities, especially in BIPOC communities. Before ABLE accounts were established in 2016, I quickly understood how difficult it was for me to personally navigate working and maintaining eligibility for public benefits, and let alone finding a job that's going to accommodate my significant physical disabilities and meet my passion and interest. I believe that everyone has the right to work, to be in a job that meets their passion, and people with disabilities need to also have those opportunities. And in that regard, I was very fortunate to have a strong and supportive family. They definitely encouraged me to go to university and pursue community employment, but feared that I would lose access to my critically needed means-tested public benefits. And they knew that alone, they couldn't help me replace my benefits and my Medicaid waiver services. So for me, opening the ABLE account was a lifeline for me to be able to access working and maintain eligibility for public benefits.
Yeah, I've had a lot of prior work on the SNAP, TANF, Medicaid kind of public benefits side. And so I'm aware of, benefits cliffs, among other things that make it really difficult to maintain eligibility while still trying to save money or while still trying to kind of get to financial security. So,
and the great thing about ABLE accounts is that they're so flexible. You don't necessarily have to work to benefit from them. You can save for longer term expenses, or even as a child with a family, the family can help open the ABLE account and immediately make contributions to save, after family members pass away, or if they have to move to another state. It's just a great way to plan for unexpected expenses, help someone pursue hobbies or the interest. They're so flexible.
Mm-hmm. And what advice would you have for people who might be eligible to open an account? Would you just recommend ABLE accounts for everyone who qualifies?
So 100% I would recommend anyone who is eligible to open an ABLE account as soon as possible so that they can more immediately save for qualified disability expenses. The ABLE National Resource Center has an abundance of helpful content to assist each person wherever they are in their ABLE account journey. The roadmap to enrollment and the roadmap to independence on the ABLE NRC website are great places to start. And we also have our recently developed ABLE Decision Guide series, which focus on a variety of different topics. Ones that I use most often focus on finding funds for contributions and how to navigate maintaining that eligibility for public benefits while working at the same time. Those are my favorite resources for adults with disabilities because making small contributions, I think, are an essential piece for people with disabilities to maintain their long-term financial future and just build wealth and have the opportunity to build wealth like everyone else has.
And Nathan, as a financial educator, as a financial coach, how would you say ABLE accounts, can you talk a little bit more about how ABLE accounts integrate with other financial literacy and wealth building approaches?
So ABLE accounts provide people with disabilities an opportunity to exercise self-determination since the person with a disability owns the account. It's their name on the account, they direct the funds, and ABLE accounts also allow the person with a disability to easily access investment options with an account that they fully control. If the account owner needs assistance, they can have a trusted family member or support person assist them. And for people with disabilities who have a special needs trust or pooled trust, they can direct the trust to contribute to their ABLE account for more flexibility in how to access and use the funds, especially on food and housing expenses. You can have more than one of these protected savings vehicles. In fact, the Special Needs Alliance, a national organization of attorneys who focus their practices on disability law and are experts on special needs trust and pooled trust, work with the ABLE National Resource Center to develop resources such as the ABLE account, special needs trust, and pooled trust comparison chart available at the ABLE NRC website to help people have accurate, objective information on the various protected savings vehicles and how they're different and how they can work together.
And if people are curious about these resources, we certainly will have links to them in the slides. So once they're available, you will be able to check them all out. And Nathan, as we kind of look to financial stability for people with disabilities, where would you situate ABLE accounts in a larger set of issues we need to consider? So ABLE as kind of one piece of kind of this larger puzzle. What would you say that other puzzle pieces look like?
So ABLE accounts are definitely a foundational strategy to build wealth, plan for the future or unexpected expenses, and generally make it easier to live, learn, and access our communities as people with disabilities. ABLE accounts ultimately allow owners such as myself to live more self-determined lives. And I think as a proud member of the ADA generation, I've greatly appreciated the impact of all these protections for my entire life. And the ABLE Act builds on the promise of ADA, providing a powerful tool that can help millions of people with disabilities live life to their fullest potential. And having that ABLE account too, it really just allows for individuals, once they're freed from having to worry about the constraints of resource limits for means-tested programs, to think about ways that everyone else would generally build wealth in terms of making big ticket expenses in ways that just weren't previously possible. Purchasing a vehicle or a home, for instance, to feel truly integrated in with their communities. I think that's one of the biggest promises of the ABLE Act and ABLE accounts, is that ability for people with disabilities to truly integrate in with their peers.
And Nathan, is there a particular financial goal that that you've kind of set, and how your ABLE account is helping you to kind of achieve that goal?
Absolutely. So I am definitely a saver for bigger expenses when it comes to how I use my ABLE account. And so initially, because even though I live in an urban area, we have significant limitations on the transportation that the community is able to provide. So my initial goal was to buy an accessible vehicle, and I was able to accomplish that in 2019 with the help of my family. And since then, I have been saving for a down payment on a home so that I can give back to the great community in Lucas County that's given so much to me. We have a very strong community here, and we're supportive of people with disabilities. And I just want to be a part of that, like everyone else.
Great. Thank you so much, Nathan, for sharing your personal experience and your expertise around ABLE accounts and kind of gaining financial security. If folks have questions for Nathan, please do put them in the Q&A. We will be having time for that at the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. So we've heard from Andrea about how to understand intersectionality as it applies to race and disability, and how people of color with disabilities face unique systemic challenges as a result of those intersecting identities. And then just now, Nathan shared several ways to positively impact financial inclusion and build economic self-sufficiency. And we're going to continue that conversation with Ben Feimer from Justine Petersen. So Ben, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Mahika. Hello, everybody. My name is Ben Feimer. I'm the credit building manager here at Justine Petersen. And I first off want to say I'm very, very excited to be here and be part of this panel, as well as I want to thank Andrea and Nathan for really digging into these topics about the systemic inequalities that are out here in the United States for people with disabilities and people of color, as well as the different kinds of resources that are available to them to help them get access to the things that they need. And one half of the other half, I think, of what Nathan was touching on with the ABLE accounts is setting up your own savings, making sure that you are able to purchase something like a vehicle or a home to be integrated into your community. The other half of that coin, I think, in my personal opinion, is credit. And credit is what I do. That's in my title. I'm the credit building manager here at Justine Petersen. And Justine Petersen is a CDFI, a community development financial institution based in St. Louis, Missouri, that does quite a bit of small business lending as well as credit building activities, both in Missouri and around the country in general. And I wanted to touch on making sure that people of color with disabilities have access to the institutional resources that they need. And half of that equation, like Nathan said, money means freedom. And half of that equation in getting access to the institutional resources they need is credit. And unfortunately, because of the way that the system is built here in the United States, primarily the credit system, as well as the access to different kinds of loans and lending, it's built to keep people down. And can we go to the next slide, please? So the system is designed to keep people trapped. And on this slide, you can see a map from the Center of Responsible Lending. They published this actually in March of 2021. And this is a map of the United States for the average interest rate for a $300 loan. And it's a 2-week, 14-day, $300 loan. And Justine Petersen is located in St. Louis, Missouri. The average interest rate for a $300 loan in Missouri is 527%. There's over half of half of the states in the US don't have any kind of caps on the interest rates that payday loans are able to offer. Or if they do, they are exorbitant. I think last time I heard, the cap for a payday loan in Missouri is around 1,024%. And that's just, in my personal opinion, obscene. Now, I don't quote me on that number, but it's quite high. And so the average is 527%. And when people with disabilities, as well as Andrea said, people living in poverty, they don't have access to a lot of funds. And so when they have a breakdown in their car, or they've run out of money, or they're on a fixed income and they're waiting until their next payday, a lot of the people that we at Justine Petersen work with, they turn to payday loans. And payday loans, in my personal opinion, are an epidemic in this country that are designed to keep people trapped in this vicious cycle. And so take a second to find your state. If you're lucky enough to live in one of the states that's in blue, there are specific caps on what a payday loan can offer. Illinois, right next door to Missouri, I think just this last year, capped it out at 36% for a payday loan. It could be 36, could be 37, but that's a cap. And if anybody has any experience in lending or borrowing, generally having an interest rate that's double digits is way too high. And I can't tell you how many people I sit down with day after day that we pull up their credit report and I see that they're paying $600 a month for a car. And I'm asking, what are you driving? What kind of great German car are you driving? And they're not. They're paying $600 a month for a 3-year-old Toyota. And that's just not sustainable, because that kind of payment, as Andrea said, we are working with people that have 40, 50% of their monthly income going towards their living situation, their housing, and they're paying another $600 or so to be able to have access to a vehicle in order to get to work. That's not sustainable. And so people lean into, a lot of my clients lean into these payday loans. So this is just an average of a 2-week payday loan for $300. I want to give you guys another example of a gentleman that I worked with earlier last month. He borrowed $600 from a local payday lender here in Missouri, and that payday loan was around that 527%. So we borrowed $600 for a 6-month payback. And doing the math on that, he and I sat down and we did the math, and he's paying a total of $1,180 in interest on a $600 loan for 6 months, which means he's paying $1,700 for a $600 loan. And I think one of the things that Justine Petersen really tries to focus on is to let people know that these systems are out there and that they are designed to keep people trapped. And if somebody falls behind on one of these extensive payday loans, then the payday lender will offer them another loan to pay off their first loan, and then they'll reset the interest rate, they'll reset their payments, and they stay in that cycle. Justine Petersen tries to combat that through several different things. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we have several core products here at JP. We focus on credit building and financial education, which is what I do. That's what I'm doing right now, working with you. We also focus on home ownership preparation and retention, and small business microenterprise lending and training. And we do a lot of that through one-on-one work with our clients. They come in, we sit down, we pull their budget, we go over it with them. We see where people with disabilities, people of color, time and time again might be caught in one of these traps, or might be on a fixed income and they can't afford to pay their bills. So Justine Petersen, being a CDFI, focuses a lot on one-on-one lending. We offer consumer loans to people that might not necessarily qualify for them with traditional institutions. And one of the reasons that we do that is because we have a very specific philosophy about people's financial situation. Can we go to the next slide? We think that our philosophy is that credit is an asset. If you think of credit as the other half of the coin on saving, like Nathan talked about, then it can give you access to so many more things out there in the world. I liken your credit score to your adult report card. You know, when we were going through school, we had our report card. Our grades mattered until we went to the next grade. Our grades mattered when we went to college, to university, on and on and on. But once you graduate from that, your grades don't matter so much anymore. If you need access to an apartment, if you need access to buying a car so that you can get to work every day, they check your credit score 9 times out of 10. And so focusing on building your credit score is, we think, the single most important factor in developing long-term assets. I 120% agree with Nathan that saving, getting access to different products that enable you to save and build up your own financial profile is the other half of the coin, 120%. But being aware of your credit and how it works is the other half, because if you have a strong credit profile, you can save on average $250,000 over your lifetime in interest and fees, and primarily through avoiding payday loans. So Justine Petersen really tries to focus on making sure that we have and work with different institutions that offer things like credit building loans. So I highly encourage you to look into an organization called Credit Builders Alliance. They are a network of Cdfis, community development financial institutions around the nation, that work with and offer personal and small business loans to people that might not traditionally qualify. So staying on top of credit building and staying on top of the different products that are available to them is really going to help propel the people that we work with to the next level and secure their financial future. And that's all I have. Thanks, Mahika.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ben, for taking us through the inequities resulting from predatory payday loans, as well as the racial gap in marketing by banks and payday lenders, and also for sharing the types of services that can help remediate the problem, such as credit building and micro enterprise lending and training. So we are now going to move into the Q&A section of the webinar. Next slide, please. We have some really great questions from folks in the audience today, and I'll do my best to get us through all of them. First up, Andrea, we have a question for you. Can you tell us what are some of the reasons for the disparities we see between the average household net worth per race?
Okay, I'll respond to that based on knowledge I have from other data points, but it's not based on a model, a regression model, which would be the statistical way to do this. That will be the next step in the research. But just based on what other data points that I know. What do you need to accumulate net worth, to have assets? You need the means to acquire them. So for example, think of buying a house. What do you need to buy a house? Well, you have money, you need money, right? And so I'm just now finished looking at data from 2019 from the FDIC, and I look at income in people with disability by race and ethnicity, and what we can see is that Black and Latinx are more represented in lower income brackets. Black and Latinx people with disability are more represented in lower income brackets and less represented in higher income brackets compared to white households with disability. So there is an inequity there in terms of income. We also found in this data that persons who are households that are Black and Latinx with disability have a marginally higher, is still higher, not as much as with the income, but it's still higher unmet need for credit. And that goes to what Ben talks about. So people who have used non-bank credit, people who have not applied for credit, for bank credit, because they are scared that they're going to be turned down. And so we see a big impact of disability because we don't see as much differences among the races as we see in income, but still you see that there's more unmet need for credit in people in household disability who are Black and Latinx. And lastly, one way to get income is employment, right? And so if you look at data, I was just looking at notes I have, if you look at data from the Department of Labor from 2020, you will see that higher percentages of Black and Latinx people with disabilities are unemployed compared to to what? Now, most people with disabilities are actually out of the labor force. So that means not only they're unemployed, but they also stop looking for a job actively. I don't have data disaggregated by race there, but given that unemployment is higher in persons with disabilities that are Black and Latinx, I suspect that also a higher percentage of them are out of the labor force. So all that combined, I think, and other factors that I can think of right now. But all of those realities, I think, are leading to this difference in the net worth of households with disabilities depending on their race.
Thank you, Andrea. And just a follow-up question. One of the participants was interested to learn why the Indigenous population was left out of a couple of those graphs in the slides.
Thank you so much for that question. That is a very important question. So this is what we will call a data gap, and it's an issue of also inequity. So we need equitable data, which means that to show inequalities, we need to collect data from all the groups, right? But what happens is that sometimes we don't have enough data. And if we don't have enough data, we cannot calculate an estimate for the population. So that's what happens many times with data. Data are what is called weighted by the Census Bureau so that they represent what the census says about the total of the nation population, but that sometimes means that you end up with a sample that is too small for certain groups, and then we end up with the data gap, which means we don't have the means to really calculate reliable population estimates for those groups. So thank you for that question, because that's something that is important to bring to the forefront. We need to make sure that we have data for all these groups.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrea. Next, I have a question here for Nathan. Nathan, can you say more about what it is to be an ABLE ambassador and maybe some of the things that you do as an ABLE ambassador?
So a lot of what we do in our work as ABLE ambassadors is connecting with our communities, listening to the inequalities they have around financial empowerment and connecting them with resources in their community to strengthen their economic self-sufficiency. We do a lot of just helping people build what we call a circle of support, identifying allies in their life that might be able to help them, or community organizations that might be able to help them open an ABLE account or find out more information on how to gain access to credit or make larger purchases. We provide just a lot of information, and we want to be a support system to them, maybe share our personal experiences, but as ambassadors, it's important to note that we don't provide case management services, so we're always going to refer them to community resources for that.
Great, thank you, Nathan. And there was another question here for you. Do you know of any additional resources for people of color with disabilities that have also been involved with the prison industrial system, and how their needs might be different, and kind of what services are there for them specifically?
That's a good question. I would have to circle back on specifics. One of the great things about ABLE accounts, though, is that if you do have a disability that's onset before the age of 26, they are open to you. You don't necessarily need to have Social Security benefits to open the ABLE account. If you can have a doctor certify that you have a disability before the age of 26, that ABLE account is available to you. And as far as someone had a question about advocacy, one of the things that the ABLE National Resource Center is supporting is lifting the age requirement to open that ABLE account to 46 years old.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nathan.
You're welcome.
And Ben, I have a question here for you. So small business owners and entrepreneurs with disabilities lack access to credit and loans that are at a reasonable rate due to no or poor credit history. How could Cdfis do more nationwide to respond to the needs of people with disabilities?
Oh, that's a great question. And I don't want to speak for an entire industry, but I will say that Justine Petersen as a Cdfi, and there was another question about what Cdfi stands for. That stands for a Community Development Financial Institution. So we're a lending institution that looks past the traditional means of how somebody might qualify for a loan. And that's kind of how I would answer that question, Mahika, is that Cdfis in general try to look past the traditional underwriting standards for a loan from like a bank. We try to look, and especially here at JP, we look into people's, not just their credit scores, but what does their income look like? Are they a member of the community? And some organizations start people out with starter loans. And if they can pay back a $300 credit building loan, then they absolutely will, we will absolutely work with you to get a $5,000 small business loan, or a 10 or a 15. It's about relationship building, I think, with your borrowers as a CDFI, and looking past, oh, well, you don't have a 700 credit score, so you can't work with us. So having an open mind about underwriting standards really opens things up for a lot of our borrowers.
Thank you, Ben, for that very robust answer. The last question, and we're coming up here at the end to the end of the webinar, but there's a really good last question here that I want to ask to all of our panelists. And this question is, are there recommendations about how to have the conversation in your community about the employment discrimination faced by folks with disabilities, particularly BIPOC and other minority folks with disabilities? So a question around how to have these conversations in folks' respective communities. This is for anyone and everyone.
Okay, I give it. This is Andrea. Something that I off the top of my head that I can think of as we did some work looking at entrepreneurship in persons with disabilities. So persons with disabilities that have started their own businesses, and we talked to an organization that has incubators and supports people with disabilities in starting their entrepreneurship. And there is something that they say in their website that I think apply to the employment in any type, whether it's entrepreneurship or being an employee in a company, about person with disability, and is that they have a you have a problem solving kind of mindset, right? Because they are living in a world that is not designed for them, right? So every day they have to problem solve. And Nathan, you can agree or disagree with my perspective. I'm not a person with disability myself, but I'm speaking from what this organization talk about, and that made sense to me. I mean, having to resolve so many situations that are not planned for you, and you have to work around it and solve it, I think is a great skill that anybody would want in an employee. So I think highlighting the strength that hiring people with disabilities will bring to your organization is a way to bring about this conversation.
Thank you, Andrea. Next slide. Oh, sorry, Nathan, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was just going to say that I definitely agree with that approach. And I would also say that reaching out specifically to BIPOC communities and targeting information to them, maybe finding someone, on your staff who is motivated and interested in targeted outreach to BIPOC communities is a way to provide equitable information, because one of the areas I struggled with coming up is having access to accurate and equitable information. So I just think that this type of a peer support model is something that a variety of agencies and organizations can emulate.
Thank you, Nathan. It's always so good to have a webinar end on a really high and hopeful, optimistic tone. So thank you both very much for that. Next slide, please. We have a few minutes left. If you'd like to learn more about our speakers and the wonderful work they do, here are several resources you can access. These links will be in the slide deck that you can access once it's uploaded on the website. We have the full NDI report on race, ethnicity, and disability, in addition to the new financial toolkit for individuals with disabilities. We have a whole host of ABLE resources and more information about Justine Petersen. Next slide. If you enjoyed today's webinar, we hope you stay in touch. If you'd like to be the first to know about upcoming events, we encourage you to follow the Lead Center and sign up for our newsletter. This slide includes a link to the Lead Center website where you can sign up to get information and notifications. Next slide, please. You'll see that there are many ways that you can connect with us. You can follow the Lead Center via Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Next slide. A very special thank you to our three presenters, Andrea, Nathan, and Ben, and another big thank you to all of you in the audience for coming out today. We hope to share with you again during upcoming Lead Center webinars. Have a great rest of your day. The session is now closed.